Hello and welcome to Coding with Curry. Today I finally decided to do a video on Redux. If you're new to React, Redux is a way for you to manage state in your app in one location. So instead of having your state local in your components, you can have some state separate in your app that you can access from different components. So those that are first learning Redux, it can be very confusing at first, but I'm going to try and simplify it as best as I can by creating a short little app here. We have the food form, which is this screen here. We have our navigation options for React navigation. And we have local state here for food, which is the input here, the input text. And we have a food list array here, which will store our list of foods. And we have a submit food function here to set the food list. So this bread operator takes the existing food list and it adds a new food with a key that is a random string based on math.random, and name, which is the food text here. And we have a delete food function, which will delete a food based on a filter function. So it's saying if the key matches the key in the list, then we delete that food object. Okay, and you can see our text here. We have our text input. We're setting the state for food when we change the text. And we have a button to submit the food. So we're submitting this.state.food. So whatever text we put in here, so we could put burger here. So now this.state.food is now burger. And we have a button to go to the food list screen. So this is part of the React navigation library. If you're not familiar with this, please look at my video that I did on using React navigation in React Native. And we're passing the food list to our food list component. And we're passing our delete function to the food list so we can delete foods. So I'm showing you how you would normally do this stuff without using Redux. This part is the part that we don't want to do. We don't want to pass the state and functions to another component if we don't have to. Okay, and you can see our styling here for our component. Now let's go to our food list. And you'll see that we have some navigation options for this too. So we can press go to food list. You can see we have green for our header. And we have a render function with a flat list. So the flat list contains the data from our food list parameter that we pass to this via the React navigation object. And then we have a list item that represents the food. So the list item is coming from React Native elements here, and the icon is too. So our key is our item.key, which is our key field that we created. And our data that comes in for the render item is data.item.name. So name is the other field that we have. And then when we press the icon, we call back to the delete food method and we pass in the key, which comes here. And then we delete that object from the food list and we update the state. So let's go back here and let's press submit for the burger. So submit, let's go to food list and you can see we have burger. Let's put in another one, let's do taco, submit, and you can see we have taco. Now let's delete taco. So I pressed the button, but because we're using React navigation, the state is not updated in this component, but it's updated in the food form because that's where we're actually setting the state. And our food list, this is actually not part of the component hierarchy. So we can go back here and then go to food list and you can see it's gone. This is what you would normally do for a basic app, but now I want to use Redux to handle our state. So the first thing I want to do is I want to create a couple new folders. I want to go to source. I want to create a folder called actions, and I want to create a folder called reducers. And now for the action folder, I want to create a file called types. So this will be our types of actions. So types.js, and we can just export a couple constants. So I'm going to do export, let's make it constant, and then I want to say add food, and then we need to assign a string to it. So let's just call it the same. Let's just say add food, and let's do export constant, delete food, and we'll do the same here. Okay, so we're just doing all this so we can organize our code so it's more maintainable. Now let's go to our reducer folder, and I want to create our reducer. So a reducer is just a way for you to create some logic based on different actions that are invoked in your application. So let's call this food reducer.js. And the first thing I want to do is import our actions. So let's import, and from let's do actions and then types. Okay, and we'll import our add and our delete. And now we need to create a constant initial state. So the initial state is the initial state of our state object here. So let's do constant initial state. This could be whatever you want to. It doesn't have to be called initial state, but it makes sense. Equals, and then we're just gonna have a food list. So we're gonna have food list. So this is very similar to what you would just do in your normal component. You would have a state object here with your food list, like we do in our food form here, like this. Okay? And now we create a reducer function. So let's say constant food reducer. And if you want to see more documentation for this, you can go to the docs here. There's docs for react-redux, and there's docs for Redux. So this one you'll probably want to look at more to understand what the different parts mean, like connect, provider, etc. But let's go back to our application here, and we say equals, and then we pass in what we want our state to be. So our state is set to initial state initially. So we're initializing our state to this here. Let's put an I in here. Okay, and then we also pass in our action. Okay, and this is the basic setup for your reducer. And now you want to do a switch for your different action types. So we can do switch, we have action, and then we have type from our action. So we have action.type. And then we want to do a case for our different types. So we do case, add food, then we return something, and then we do case, delete food, and then we return something. And then you could do a default if you want to. And for default, we just return our same state. So we just do state or return state, return state. Okay, so this is kind of the basic format of your reducer. You are using the action that you pass to this to run some logic that affects the state of your state object here. And then we want to export default food reducer. Okay, hope this makes sense so far. It's nothing too crazy yet. So we just have our action types, and we're switching our action types to run some logic. So in our add food here, I want to first do a spread operator. So we're using this spread operator because you never want to change the entire state object at once. You always want to either add to the state as it is now, or you want to update a certain part of the state. So this gets our current state as it is, and then we do something to a part of it. So here we're changing our food list. So let's say, for example, we had a test state object here, and this is null. If we ever change the food list, we don't want this to change too. So that's what this helps us do here, this spread operator. So let's get rid of this for now. And we want to say food list is now state.foodlist. So we have the current state. And then I want to add to that food list. So I want to concat to the array. So concat. And you might be wondering why we're using concat instead of push. Concat returns a new array, but push adds to the array. So with what I just said before, we don't want to mutate the state directly, but here we want to create a copy of the new array and return that back instead. So this helps us stop any race conditions that can happen if you're constantly trying to add or remove new foods very quickly in your app. Okay, and I forgot the return here. So I want to return this object here. Okay, and then I want to add, first I want to add the key. So before, if we go back to our food list, food form, here we have a key with math.random and a name.food. So I'm going to copy and paste these here. And let's put these in here. So I want this key to be math.random still. And then I want to have a action here, and we need to get our data from that action, but we don't have that yet. So let's first go to our action folder and let's create a new file, and I'm going to call it just food.js. And this is actually where we create the actual actions for our application. So the types are the action types, like they represent what we want to do. And here we'll actually put the actions with our payload here. So we want to import first our action types. So we do from types. This will all make sense in a second. And let's import our add food and our delete food. And now I want to create two functions, one called add food and one called delete food. So let's do export constant, and I want to say add food will be the name of our function, and we'll pass in a food object, and we will return a type, so like an object that has a type. So the type will be of add food, and we'll have a field here that represents the data. So we'll have, let's call it data, and it'll be the food object. Okay, and let's copy and paste this. And let's call this one delete food for our type here. And for this one, for the delete food, we only want our key. So I'm going to pass in the key here and set this field to key and set this to key. Oops, first let's call this delete food. Okay, so when we want to add a new food, the only way to do that is to call this action here. And to delete food, we have to call this delete food method from somewhere in our app. If we don't call these methods, then we cannot actually invoke this logic here. So that keeps things kind of separated out in different locations and easier to manage. Okay, so let's save this here. And let's go back to our food reducer. And now the action from our add food, we have this. So the action here represents this object. Okay? So when we add food, we get back this action object. When we delete food, we get back this delete food object. So we get back an action. So this is action. So action.type and action.data. So action.type is why we have the action.type here. I should have created this file first. So let's go back here, and now we have action.type here, and now we have action.data. Okay. So I hope that makes sense. This action represents these objects. Okay. Let's get rid of this one here. And for our delete food, we're going to have a return here also. And now we want to do the same with the state. So let's do state. Let's put this on a separate line. State. And now I want to do the same thing that we did before with our filter function. So let's go back to our delete food function here. Let's copy this here, and we'll put it into here. So now we don't have this, so we can get rid of this dot. And now we need to set it to food list. So we can set it food list. So now the food list will be this array here after we filter out that key. Okay, and now let's create the actual store for our reducer. So let's create a new file in our source here. Let's call it store.js. And the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to import some components from our Redux package. If we look in our package.json here, I added a couple different packages here. I added Redux and react-redux. So these are the two that you need for your application. So let's go to store.js. And first I want to import something from Redux. So the first thing I want to do is I want to import the create store constant, and then I want to import the combine reducers function. And I also want to import our food reducer from reducers.foodReducer. Okay? And now I want to create a constant called root reducer. And then I want to call the combine reducers function. This will be used if you need to have multiple reducers. I always create this out of habit, So now we can put a field in here that represents the reducer. Let's call it foods. Okay, and then I'm going to assign the food reducer to that value. And now down here, I'm going to create another constant called configure store. Configure store. This could be whatever you want it to be, but this is a popular name for this. And then I want to return, let's just return create store. So create store is the other value from that Redux. And then I pass the reducer to that. So I pass the root reducer to that. And then I can export default configure store. Okay, so this is all a lot of boilerplate that you need for Redux, which I don't really like, but it's just something that you have to do. This creates the store for your app. Okay, so let's go back to our app.js here. Actually, let's go to the index.js. So this is where we are putting our app component at. We're setting it here. But now we want to refactor this a bit to use our Redux store. So the first thing I want to do is I want to import a provider from react-redux. And if you go to the documentation, you can look at the provider docs here. It makes the store available to any nested components that have been wrapped in the connect function. So we'll get to the connect function in a bit too. So let's go back to our code. And I want to import our store now. So let's import configure store from source store. And now I want to create a constant object called store and assign that to configure store. And now instead of this here, I want to create a new component. So let's go down here and let's do constant, and let's just call it, it doesn't really matter, but let's just call it Redux tutorial. Okay. This would be a functional component. And then I want to return the provider component. And instead of here, we'll have our app. So let's get rid of this, and then we'll have our app here. And we can close it like this. And now we can give our store to the provider. So we can have an object called store here. So store equals store. And this has to be called store here for the provider. And then we can pass our Redux tutorial to register component. So all we did here was we wrapped our app in our provider. Okay, and we need to import React too. So let's import React from here. We have store.getState. Oh, I forgot the parentheses here. So this is a function. Don't forget that. So if you go back here to the store, you can see configure store is a function. So it's this function here. Okay, let's save. Okay, so now we have our store available to our components, but we're not actually using it in our components. So let's go back to our food list. Let's first, actually let's go to our food form and let's get rid of our food list state here. And we can also get rid of our delete food function here. So let's get rid of this. And we can get rid of the parameters that we pass to our food list. So let's get rid of this. Okay. So now we're not passing anything to our food list. So let's make sure that we're not using our state here anymore for our food list. And we can get rid of our submit food function here also. So we'll come back to these in a second. We'll just create empty functions for now. So this will not change because we still need to change our food state locally here. So this will still be the same. Okay, so this looks good. We got rid of our food list state. Let's go to our food list. And we can get rid of this console line here. And we can get rid of this onPress. So let's just make this an empty function for now. And our data will now be something different. Our data will now be part of our Redux store. So first in our food list here, we're going to add the connect higher order component. So let's go to Chrome here, and you can see connect here. The connect function connects a React component to a Redux store. So this is the last piece of the puzzle for our Redux app to work correctly. So the first thing I want to do is I want to import our connect function from Redux, from react-redux. So let's import connect from react-redux. Okay? And now let's create a couple functions. So one is called constant map state to props. We pass in the state. And the other one is called map dispatch to props. So these are both needed because we need a way to map the state to our props for our component, and we also need a way to map our actions. So map state to props maps the state, this maps the actions. And you'll see how this works in a second. From here, we want to return a state object. So I'm going to call it foods. This is going to be from our state, so it's going to be state dot, and this is whatever you have as your reducer here. So let's go to the store. You can see we have foods here. Let's call this foods reducer. Okay. And let's go back to our food list. And this will be state dot foods reducer. Let's make sure I spelled that right again. So store food reducer, and it'll be dot food list because the list is part of our reducer. We'll ignore this error for now. And now for map dispatch to props, we want to map our delete food method to this. So let's go up here and import delete food from actions food. Okay? And now we can actually return, and we'll just name it delete. And then this will return a function where we need to dispatch. So dispatch, and this should be dispatched. So dispatch. This could be whatever you want it to be, really. And then we call our delete food method, and we pass in whatever we pass into that action. So we have key. So for the delete method, we pass in the key. So we have our key here. So delete food, and then we have key. Okay, I know that's a lot to take in really fast, but know that this maps to your reducer. So state, if you are not sure what this is, you can always do console.log state, and you'll see that our food list comes from state.foodreducer.foodlist. Okay? You can do the same with dispatch if you want to. So now if we want to delete a food, we call this delete from our props. So we have props.delete and props.foods here. So now we connect this to our component by first putting this in parentheses, and we can say connect. And for connect, we pass in the map state to props, and we pass in the map dispatch to props. So let's go back to our food form. And let's actually just copy and paste a lot of this here. So let's copy this into here, parentheses, and let's import our connect here. Now let's copy these here, and let's copy and paste this into here, but we don't need this now. So let's get rid of map dispatch to props. And this is okay for this. If you don't need the dispatch, you could just leave it out here. Okay, let's save. Now let's go to our food list. And for our data is now going to be coming from our props. This dot props dot foods. Save. And for our delete here, we now have access to our delete function here, thanks to our map dispatch to props. So let's say this dot props, and it'll be just delete. And we can pass in our key from our data. So we can say data.item.key. Okay, save. And let's reload and let's test it out. So first let's type in let's not even type in anything. Let's go to food list. And we have no food, so that's good. We have no errors. Let's go back. And let's type in burger. Let's submit. Go to food list. It's not there. So let's see what we did wrong. Let's go back to our food form. Submit. Oh yeah, so we forgot to actually handle our submit here. So for the submit, we need to have an action to add our food. So let's go to the food list and let's copy this. And I want to have add food now. So we also need our map dispatch to props. So let's copy this and paste this into here. And here we just need our add food. And let's just call it add. Have our add food function here to pass in our food object. So this would be food, not key in this case. And then we do map dispatch to props. Okay, let's save. And let's test this out. Let's reload. And we still need to add that here. So let's do this dot props dot add, and then we can pass in our state. So this dot state dot food. Okay. Reload and let's add. First, let's test it out without a food. Let's go to food list. It's okay. Let's add a food burger. Submit. Go to food list, and you can see our burger is here. Let's go back. Let's do taco, submit, and you can see our taco is here. So our add is working correctly. And let's try to delete a food. Let's delete taco. And we have a reference key is not defined. So let's go to food reducer 21. Not equal to, this should be action.key because our key is coming from our action now. So we have action.key. Okay. Let's reload. That's okay. And let's add a few different foods here. Let's do burger. Let's do taco and pie. Okay, and you can see the three things here. Now let's try to delete taco. And you can see it's gone right away. So this is a great way to use Redux with your React navigation without having to pass stuff around and without having to refresh the component that you're in manually. And we can go back here and we can see that it's still gone. We can delete pie. You can see it's gone. You can say cheese, submit, delete burger, it's gone. And yeah, this is a great way for you to manage state in your application. Redux is pretty complex at first glance, but once you start using it, it becomes a lot easier and it becomes a lot more repetitive and simple. There's a lot of boilerplate with it, but it's very powerful and it's been around for a long time. Let's go over this one more time just to hammer the point home of what this is. So we have a action type here for food, for adding food and delete food. We have a food action function here to control the payload of the object. So the payload is the food here, the payload is the key here. So the only way to mutate the state in your application is to call these two methods. And then this represents the action in your reducer. So if you go to your reducer, we have the initial state here, which is our food list. And then we're switching the action.type for our action types, which are add food and delete food. And add food, we are creating a new food list by concatenating it to the old one and using the action.data, which is our food object. And then we set the state for that new list in our food list. When we delete food, we are filtering out the food that we don't want based on our key. And we're taking that food list and we're setting the state to the food list object here. And then we go to our index, and this is where the store is available to us in our entire app. So you can actually make this available only to certain parts of your app. So if you have different components in here, you can provide different stores to your app. So you can configure multiple stores. You can have multiple reducers in your store here. So if you had more reducers, you can just add more here. So this file is probably the most confusing, but it's very easy to remember how to do this once you do it a couple times. It just gets your food reducer, it puts it into your root reducer. So this just combines your reducers together. And then you configure your store, and this is your store function that's available to you throughout your entire app. And then in your components that you want to connect with your store, you need to use the connect function that takes in the map state to props and map dispatch to props. And that makes your state available to your component. And that makes the action functions available to your component too. So without this here, you wouldn't actually be able to mutate the state of your app. That's what map dispatch to props is for. And map state to props, if that wasn't here, you wouldn't be able to access the state from your store. Okay, I hope that makes sense. It's a lot to go over in a short amount of time, but if you have any more questions, please leave comments in the comments below and I will get back to you as soon as possible. Redux is only one way to manage state. There's different ways. There's MobX, there's hooks and context API. Those are probably the other two most popular ones for React Native, but there's a lot more than that too. If you have any questions, please ask and stay tuned for the next video, and happy coding. Bye.